Beyond categorical thinking, concerns and benefits form that you are about to fill out is a chance for you as an individual, as part of a congregation, to think about any concerns or benefits you might have in calling a minister who identifies as a person of color, as someone who identifies as someone with a disability or mental health concern, as someone who is part of the BGLTQ plus community. We also use the form as a teaching moment because I want you to think about how this has evolved. Back in 1996, when we asked congregations to think about what concerns they might have around calling a minister of color, most of our congregations thought that meant someone who was African American or black. Today, in 2020, what that means is very different, because most of our ministers who identify as ministers of color do not identify with one particular identity. They identify as being black, African American, Native American, First Nation Indian, Latinx Hispanic, Caribbean American, Asian American, Arab American, multiracial, multi-ethnic, people with a wide variety of identities fit into the category for ministers of color here in the sheet. So each section asks you to think about three questions. The first question is, do you yourself have any concerns around calling a minister of color? Now, you can be very generic or very specific. For example, I'm concerned that any minister of color here would. And then you can fill that out. Or you may be very specific. Like, for example, I may be concerned that any minister of Arab descent here would. Or any minister who is Latinx would. So you can be generic or specific about how you answer the question. If you don't have any concerns yourself, you can simply mark the box that says, I don't have any concerns, and move to the second question. If you do, mark that box saying you do have concerns, and then list them in the space that's provided. The second question is about any kind of congregational concerns you think might exist. Now, you may know just from talking with people in the congregation, or have a suspicion after talking with people in the congregation, that there would be some folks who might have a concern around calling a minister of color. And this is your chance to bring those concerns into the room so that we can talk about them. So again, you can be generic to all ministers of color, specific to someone with a particular identity, and fill those in. If you can't think or don't know of any congregational concerns, you can leave it blank. Third question is around benefits. What benefits do you think might exist from the congregation calling a minister of color? And again, you could be very specific to one identity or generic to all identities. When you're done with that section, you move on to the section around calling a minister who has some sort of mental health or disability issue. Back when we started the workshop over 25 years ago, people thought about the fact that when you said disability, you meant someone who is blind, someone who is deaf, someone who is in a wheelchair. The reality is we have no minister who's completely blind serving a congregation. We do have some ministers who have some vision impairments. We have only one minister serving in ministry who is completely deaf, and she is doing a ministry with a deaf community where she lives outside of Unitarian Universalism. We don't have any minister who is completely in a wheelchair all the time. We have ministers who use scooters for long distances. We have ministers who use scooters as a way to get around, but who are able to be outside of their scooter. We have people who need canes, or people who need handrails, people who need an elevator. But it is not just about people in wheelchairs. We also have ministers who have other identities too, and our understanding around disability and mental health has expanded. We think about people who have physical disabilities of some kind, people with multiple sclerosis or arthritis, something that causes them to move more slowly, people with emotional disabilities, people dealing with depression, addiction, bipolar. people dealing with cognitive disabilities, people being dyslexic or having attention deficit disorder, for example. People with invisible disabilities that require some accommodations, people who are epileptic or diabetic who need to watch how they move through the world, and it affects how they move through the world. Anything that requires some accommodation. So again, as you're thinking about what it means to have a disability or mental health, think broadly. Again, for all three questions, you can think generically or specifically around disabilities in general or around a particular identity. And you can go through the three categories: your personal concerns, concerns you think might exist within the congregation, and any benefits this might bring for the congregation. The third category is around bisexual, gay, lesbian, transgender plus. And you go through this in the same way. Any specific concerns you have around a particular identity, any generic concerns, feel free to list them either way. And again, you do it through all three categories. It's also interesting to see how this has expanded, because now when we talk about BGLTQ+, we're talking about bisexual, gay, lesbian, transgender, queer, questioning, intersex, asexual as identities, and you're free again to be as specific as you want. The last section is for other identities, and it's involved, gives you a chance to think about other ways that might be of concern or a benefit for the congregation, whether it's around age, whether it's around someone's size or weight, whether it's around their class background, any other way that an identity might come into play in terms of how the congregation or you see a minister. It's your chance to list it as a concern or benefit. So it should take you about 10 minutes to do. Once you're done, hit submit, and then these will go automatically to the trainer, who will tabulate all of the responses that were submitted and share the results with the congregation. Again, thank you for taking a few minutes to fill this out, and we're glad you're here at the workshop.